For 10 million years after the dinosaurs disappeared, Earth had no ruler. The old giants were gone. Entire ecological roles stood empty, and everything that survived suddenly found itself living on a planet without an established hierarchy. The mammals supposedly destined to inherit the Earth were still mostly small, hidden creatures, nowhere near ready to dominate anything. And into that vacancy came contenders that seem almost impossible today. In the northern world, a 6-foot bird with an enormous skull rose among the largest animals of its environment. Scientists thought they understood what it was for more than a century. They were wrong. Farther south, conditions produced a snake of extraordinary proportions, large enough to occupy a world where almost nothing had yet evolved to challenge it. Birds became giants. Reptiles reclaimed positions left vacant by extinction. Mammals began experimenting with forms that would eventually lead somewhere entirely different, but none of them truly owned this world. The Paleocene was a 10 million year struggle over what would replace the dinosaurs, filled with evolutionary experiments that rose, dominated briefly, and disappeared. And just when something resembling order finally began to emerge, Earth changed again. Another planetary disruption was approaching, one that would reshape the climate, overturn ecosystems, and transform the competition once more. What survived that change would help build the world we recognize today. But first came the strange, brutal age in between. Today, we're stepping into that forgotten interval when the old rulers were already gone and the lineages that dominate our world had not yet taken their place. If you enjoy exploring these lost chapters of Earth's history, hit like and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The Paleocene was the first epoch of the Paleogene period, stretching from 66 million years ago until 56 million years ago, an interval lasting exactly 10 million years. It stood between two planetary upheavals, opening with the catastrophe that erased the age of dinosaurs and closing with another episode of dramatic global warming that reshaped life once again. Every moment within those 10 million years unfolded inside the long shadow cast by those two immense events. The opening catastrophe removed nearly 75% of all species on Earth. The great non-avian dinosaurs, whose reign had endured for 130 million years, disappeared alongside countless marine reptiles, flying reptiles, and many forms of ocean life. Vast herbivores no longer browsed forests. Towering predators no longer controlled the land. Across rivers, coastlines, plains, and seas, every major ecological position occupied by large animals became vacant at almost the same moment, leaving living communities stripped of the balance that had defined them for ages. This absence created what paleontologists describe as a trophic vacancy. When apex predators vanish, the structure of a food web begins to unravel. Populations lose the forces that once regulated them. Relationships between hunters and prey become unstable, and ecological order gives way to open competition. That condition can endure for immense spans of time, lasting until new organisms gradually evolve into the vacant roles. During the Paleocene, that vacancy became the defining feature of the entire planet. For the first time in more than 100 million years, no creature exercised unquestioned control over any major ecosystem. The world did not immediately crown a replacement for the vanished rulers. Instead, every continent became a place where different lineages tested unfamiliar possibilities. Dominance remained uncertain, shifting from one region to another without a single victor capable of shaping life on a global scale. The landscapes themselves survived more completely than the animals that had once occupied them. Forests still spread across valleys. Rivers continued carving their channels, and insects carried on with astonishing resilience. Leaves unfolded beneath the returning sunlight, seeds germinated, and freshwater systems flowed much as they always had. Yet the tracks of giant bodies had disappeared. The scenery endured, while the immense creatures that once moved through it had become part of the distant past. Those left behind were humble survivors. Most were small enough to hide beneath roots, inside burrows, or among tangled vegetation. Many were active during darkness, feeding on whatever they could find without depending upon a single resource. Flexibility became their greatest strength. Their bodies were modest, their diets varied, and their habits adaptable. Such creatures seemed unlikely founders for a new biological dynasty, yet they represented the only living foundation available after the catastrophe. Everything that followed emerged from those resilient survivors and the opportunities surrounding them. The Paleocene inherited a living world whose framework remained standing while its greatest occupants had vanished. From that improbable beginning came countless experiments in survival, growth, and competition. Here, among empty ecological roles and determined survivors, the brutal age truly began. Long before any great hunter stepped into the vacant places left behind by extinction, another kingdom spread across the planet with astonishing speed. Its rulers carried no teeth, no claws, and no beating hearts. They did not chase prey through forests or patrol ancient shorelines. For a brief but essential chapter at the beginning of the Paleocene, fungi became the dominant force shaping Earth's recovery. The impact that marked the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction hurled immense quantities of rock, ash, and vapor high into the atmosphere. Much of that material remained suspended for weeks and months, dimming sunlight across the globe. As daylight weakened, photosynthesis faltered. Plants that depended upon constant light struggled to survive, and entire landscapes gradually filled with fallen trunks, dead leaves, and lifeless vegetation that no longer received the energy needed to grow. That immense blanket of decay became an opportunity for organisms requiring neither sunlight nor living plants. Saprotrophic fungi flourished by breaking down dead organic matter, releasing nutrients locked inside fallen wood, withered stems, and countless other remains. While green life paused, fungal networks expanded across the recovering world, performing work that no other organisms could accomplish on the same scale. Every decomposed branch and every softened leaf returned valuable elements to soils that would eventually support new forests. Evidence of this extraordinary interval remains preserved inside ancient sediments. Geologists have discovered what is known as the fungal spike, an unusually abundant layer of fossil fungal spores appearing immediately above the clay deposited by the extinction event. These layers have been identified in places as distant from one another as New Zealand, Colorado, and North Dakota, each recording the same brief chapter in Earth's history. Across continents separated by vast oceans, the pattern repeats with remarkable consistency. Within some of those sediment layers, fungal remains account for roughly half of all microscopic fossils recovered. Such overwhelming dominance has no comparable example before or after this interval in the geological record. It captures a world where decomposers briefly overshadowed nearly every other form of complex life, creating a signature so distinctive that paleontologists can recognize the aftermath of the extinction from microscopic spores alone. This pattern reaches even deeper into Earth's past. Similar fungal surges appear after other great biological crises, including the Permian mass extinction, when roughly 90% of all species disappeared. Each occurrence suggests that fungi serve as one of the planet's most dependable recovery systems. They dismantle the remains of collapsed ecosystems, recycle essential nutrients, and prepare exhausted landscapes for whatever forms of life emerge next. Their labor provides continuity during moments when nearly everything else has been interrupted. This fungal age did not endure for millions of years. As the atmosphere gradually cleared, sunlight strengthened, and fresh vegetation returned, the enormous supply of dead organic material steadily diminished. The conditions that had favored fungal expansion slowly faded, allowing plants and the animals that depended upon them to reclaim increasing portions of the landscape. Even so, without those decomposers maintaining nutrient cycles through the darkest chapter, the rebuilding of life would have faced obstacles far greater than the extinction itself. By the time the last great waves of decay had been transformed into fertile ground, the planet had become something entirely unfamiliar. Fresh forests would soon spread across continents, carrying different plants, different opportunities, and different competitors. The fungi completed their unseen labor, and the world that emerged bore little resemblance to the one that had vanished. Green returned in an order few would have expected. Before towering forests reclaimed valleys and hills, carpets of ferns spread across the scarred ground with remarkable speed. Their tiny spores drifted easily through the recovering landscape, settling wherever moisture lingered. Paleobotanists recognize this moment today through a phenomenon called the fern spike, an abrupt increase in fossil fern spores preserved in rock layers around the world. A similar pattern appeared after the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980, though the Paleocene recovery unfolded across centuries instead of a handful of years. As those first waves of vegetation stabilized battered soils, the planet itself settled into a climate unlike the modern one. Average global temperatures during the Paleocene remained roughly 14 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than those of today. Permanent polar ice caps did not exist. Heat circulated more evenly across the globe, softening seasonal differences and creating conditions that encouraged forests to spread into regions that now experience long winters and frozen landscapes. Palm trees flourished far north in areas that would one day become Alaska. Tropical and subtropical vegetation extended toward both poles, forming continuous belts of greenery across enormous portions of the continents. Frost played only a limited role across much of Earth's surface, allowing plants that today survive only in warm climates to thrive over astonishing distances. The map of the living world bore little resemblance to the one familiar today. Flowering plants became the great architects of this renewed landscape. Their origins stretched back into the age of dinosaurs, yet the disappearance of immense browsing herbivores transformed their fortunes. Freed from relentless grazing pressure, they diversified across hillsides, wetlands, riverbanks, and forest interiors. New combinations of trees, shrubs, vines, and understory plants reshaped ecosystems from the ground upward, creating habitats richer and more layered than those that had existed before the extinction. These expanding forests did more than cover the land. Their structure influenced every opportunity available to the animals beginning to evolve within them. Dense canopies filtered sunlight into scattered patches. Tangles of branches connected the upper levels of the forest, while thick vegetation reduced visibility near the ground. Open spaces remained uncommon, limiting long pursuits across broad plains and encouraging strategies built around patience, concealment, climbing ability, and flexible diets. Creatures able to move through branches found resources unavailable below. Omnivores capable of switching between fruit, insects, seeds, and small prey gained valuable advantages in habitats where food changed with location and season. Ambush hunters benefited from vegetation that interrupted long sight lines, while specialized runners found few opportunities to exploit speed alone. The architecture of the forest directed evolution, rewarding body plans that matched its complexity instead of resisting it. Humidity remained high across many regions, nourishing rivers that wandered beneath continuous tree cover. Thick vegetation stabilized soils, reducing erosion and supporting expanding freshwater ecosystems. Countless insects pollinated flowering plants, dispersed seeds, and formed the foundation of increasingly intricate food webs. Every branch, leaf, and root contributed to a living framework that extended across continents, warmed by an enduring greenhouse climate. The Paleocene did not rebuild the landscapes that had been lost. It assembled an entirely different world, rich with forests whose design shaped every lineage growing within them. From towering trees to creeping vines, the land itself became an active participant in evolution, guiding the forms of the animals that would spend millions of years adapting to its embrace. Looking back from the modern world, it is easy to imagine that the disappearance of the dinosaurs immediately cleared the path for mammals. The fossil record tells a gentler and far more uncertain story. The earliest Paleocene belonged to creatures that appeared almost insignificant, living through an age that offered opportunity while demanding patience on a scale difficult to imagine. Every mammal that crossed those early landscapes was modest in size. None exceeded the build of a modern opossum or raccoon. Their skulls held relatively small brains, their teeth still reflected ancient feeding habits, and their skeletons retained characteristics inherited from much older ancestors. These were not polished successors prepared to dominate a transformed planet. They carried the marks of lineages that had spent millions of years surviving in the margins beneath far larger neighbors. Their survival through the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction came from that very obscurity. Small bodies required less food. Burrows, tangled vegetation, and sheltered spaces offered protection from the harshest conditions. Flexible diets allowed them to consume insects, seeds, fruits, and whatever nourishment remained available. Those qualities carried them across the extinction boundary, although they offered little advantage when it came to filling the immense ecological roles that had suddenly become vacant. Among the most numerous mammals were the multituberculates, an ancient group of rodent-like herbivores that had shared the world with dinosaurs for more than 130 million years. Their chisel-shaped teeth handled seeds, nuts, and tough plant material with remarkable efficiency. Fossil deposits reveal them in extraordinary abundance, moving through forests and river margins in impressive numbers. Even so, their success reflected only one layer of a functioning ecosystem. Countless small herbivores could never replace the missing giants that once shaped entire landscapes. Another group entered the story with striking speed. These mammals, known as condylarths, possessed hoof-like feet while still carrying teeth suited to varied diets. They had not fully committed to grazing or browsing, preserving traces of their insect-eating ancestry while steadily adapting toward herbivory. Within the first million years of the Paleocene, condylarths ranged from squirrel-sized animals to forms approaching the size of modern sheep. Their diversity hinted at possibilities that evolution had only begun to explore. Placental mammals also expanded into an astonishing variety of forms. Roughly 15 separate evolutionary branches spread outward during the Paleocene, each experimenting with different ways of feeding, moving, and surviving. Seen from within that living world, the process must have resembled rapid construction, with countless lineages testing new opportunities at once. Viewed across millions of years, however, many of those experiments ended without descendants. Entire branches flourished briefly before disappearing from Earth's history. Evolution during this epoch resembled an enormous workshop where designs were drafted, revised, and discarded without certainty that any would endure. Success over a few 100,000 years offered no guarantee of permanence. Conditions continued changing, competitors continued diversifying, and ecological roles remained unsettled. Every promising lineage faced rivals, adapting just as rapidly within the same forests and floodplains. The mammals of the early Paleocene were therefore participating in something far more demanding than an inheritance. They were proving, generation after generation, whether they possessed the flexibility to occupy a world still searching for stability. Many failed despite extraordinary beginnings. Others survived only long enough to shape descendants that would eventually achieve what their ancestors never could. An empty ecosystem is never truly empty. Every abandoned role becomes an invitation, and every survivor encounters opportunities that did not exist before. Across the Paleocene, those opportunities formed an invisible framework, directing evolution with extraordinary force. The ecological vacuum left behind by the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction was not a single absence. It consisted of thousands of vacant relationships linking predators, prey, plants, scavengers, and countless other forms of life, all waiting to be rebuilt. The disappearance of giant herbivores transformed the rhythm of the land. Vegetation accumulated more rapidly than it could be consumed, allowing forests and flowering plants to spread with remarkable success. At the same time, prey populations faced fewer large hunters capable of limiting their numbers. Every organism entering this altered world encountered changing resources, changing competitors, and changing dangers. Under such conditions, larger bodies often brought important advantages, including broader diets, greater mobility, stronger defenses, and access to foods unavailable to smaller neighbors. This widespread tendency toward increasing body size is commonly known as Cope's rule. Across many evolutionary lineages, descendants gradually become larger than their ancestors over immense spans of time. During the Paleocene, however, this familiar pattern accelerated to an exceptional pace. Conditions created after the extinction rewarded expansion so consistently that mammals increased in size more rapidly than at any other stage preserved in their fossil history. Only 10 million years separated the modest survivors that entered the Paleocene from descendants occupying an astonishing range of ecological roles. Mammals that had once resembled modern shrews diversified into substantial herbivores, formidable carnivores, skilled gliders, the earliest true bats, and even the first ancestors of whales beginning their long journey toward aquatic life. Such transformation unfolded within a single epoch, compressing evolutionary change into a remarkably brief interval by geological standards. Some of the largest mammals emerging near the close of the Paleocene belong to a group called the Uintathers. Several species eventually approach the size of modern rhinoceroses, carrying heavy bodies supported by thick limbs and broad feet. Their rise becomes even more striking when measured against their tiny ancestors that had crossed the extinction boundary. Evolution had carried certain mammalian lineages from animals comparable to raccoons toward creatures rivaling some of the largest land mammals of their age. Other groups expanded with similar determination. Titanoboa developed sturdy bodies and powerful jaws, reaching sizes comparable to modern bears. Titanoboa evolved into heavily built animals, resembling large pigs in overall scale, while exploiting herbivorous feeding strategies once occupied by the vanished dinosaurs. Each lineage explored different anatomical solutions, yet all responded to the same ecological invitation created by landscapes still searching for balance. Rapid growth, however, solved only part of the challenge. Every lineage, increasing in size, encountered rivals doing exactly the same. Herbivores competed for expanding forests. Carnivores experimented with unfamiliar hunting methods. Omnivores shifted diets whenever circumstances changed. Evolution no longer unfolded along isolated paths. It resembled countless intersecting journeys, each influencing the direction of every other. The Paleocene, therefore, became an era defined by continual adjustment rather than immediate victory. Bodies grew larger, diets became more specialized, and ecosystems gained increasing complexity. Yet, stability remained elusive. Every successful adaptation altered the competitive landscape, demanding further change from neighboring species. The ecological vacuum had unleashed a cascade of experimentation, and the struggle to occupy Earth's greatest roles had only become more demanding as the world itself continued to evolve. The first great rulers of the recovering world did not emerge from the mammals struggling beneath the forest canopy. They descended from the last surviving branch of the dinosaurs themselves. While mammalian lineages remained small, adaptable, and uncertain, several birds began following an entirely different path, expanding into ecological roles that no other animals were yet capable of occupying. Birds alone had crossed the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction as living dinosaurs. Their ancestors had survived because flight, flexible diets, and modest body sizes carried them through conditions that erased countless larger relatives. Once the world stabilized, some lineages abandoned the very adaptation that had preserved them. Flight became unnecessary in environments where large terrestrial predators were almost entirely absent. Wings gradually diminished, legs strengthened, and bodies grew heavier with each generation. The change followed clear evolutionary logic. A bird no longer required powerful flight muscles when danger from below remained limited. Energy that once sustained flight could instead support greater body mass, stronger limbs, and more substantial skulls. As forests expanded and prey diversified, large ground dwelling birds discovered opportunities unavailable to their smaller airborne relatives. They could patrol broad territories, overpower sizable animals, and occupy the highest predatory positions without competing against equally massive mammalian hunters. Among the most impressive was Gastornis, a bird standing roughly 6 feet tall and weighing about 400 pounds. Its skull rivaled the size of a horse's head, ending in an enormous beak capable of producing crushing force unmatched by any other known bird. Fossils recovered across Europe and North America reveal that Gastornis occupied an immense geographic range, making it one of the most widespread large terrestrial animals of the early Paleocene and the following early Eocene. Wherever suitable forests spread, this remarkable bird found room to thrive. Far to the south, an entirely separate evolutionary story unfolded. South America produced another lineage of giant, flightless birds that shared no close relationship with Gastornis beyond their distant ancestry among birds. These were the Foresteracids, later celebrated as the terror birds. Appearing by approximately 62 million years ago, they evolved sharply hooked beaks suited for dispatching prey and long, powerful legs capable of reaching speeds close to 31 miles per hour. Their bodies reflected an unmistakably carnivorous way of life, built around pursuit, impact, and decisive strikes. The resemblance between these northern and southern giants illustrates one of evolution's most striking patterns. Two unrelated groups encountered similar ecological opportunities on continents separated by vast oceans. Each responded by producing towering, flightless predators equipped with comparable solutions despite traveling entirely independent evolutionary paths. Comparable environments repeatedly guided natural selection towards similar outcomes, demonstrating how vacant ecological roles can shape life in remarkably consistent ways. Neither lineage seized dominance through dramatic conquest. They encountered landscapes where the largest mammalian competitors had not yet appeared, allowing them to occupy the apex positions almost by default. Their success rested upon timing, body size, and inherited anatomical advantages refined for terrestrial hunting rather than aerial escape. For millions of years, these formidable birds represented the most visible rulers of many ecosystems. Their authority remained incomplete because the living world continued changing around them, yet they occupied the highest positions available until mammals finally achieved the size, strength, and diversity needed to contest a throne that had first belonged to the last surviving dinosaurs. Few Paleocene animals have changed scientific identity as dramatically as Gastornis. When its first fossils emerged from a quarry near Paris in 1855, the enormous bones seemed to announce the arrival of a terrifying hunter. Paleontologists examined its towering frame, massive skull, and heavy limbs, then assembled a portrait that appeared entirely reasonable. For the next 150 years, Gastornis stood in books, museums, and documentaries as the dominant predator of the northern Paleocene, even though that image rested more upon appearance than direct evidence. Everything about its anatomy encouraged that conclusion. The skull approached the size of a horse's head, ending in an immense beak capable of generating extraordinary crushing force. Thick neck bones supported powerful muscles, while sturdy legs suggested an animal built for walking long distances rather than flying. Standing about 6 feet tall and weighing roughly 400 pounds, Gastornis possessed every outward feature expected of an apex predator. It seemed perfectly designed to command the recovering forests that spread across Europe and North America. That impression eventually reached millions of viewers through the British Broadcasting Corporation documentary series, Walking with Beasts. One memorable sequence portrayed Gastornis pursuing small early horses, known as Propaleotherium, through dense woodland, capturing prey with dramatic precision. The scene appeared convincing because it matched decades of scientific expectation. Audiences accepted it, museums reinforced it, and the giant bird became firmly established in public imagination as one of the Paleocene's great hunters. Then, a different kind of evidence entered the discussion. Researchers examined calcium isotopes preserved within Gastornis bones, studying chemical signatures that differ reliably between herbivores and carnivores. Animals feeding upon plants accumulate distinctive isotopic patterns that contrast with those of predators consuming meat. Unlike bones shaped by interpretation, these chemical traces preserve information about diet directly within the skeleton itself. When the results appeared, they pointed consistently toward herbivory rather than carnivory. The finding transformed the story. Gastornis almost certainly spent its days feeding upon hard seeds, large nuts, and exceptionally tough vegetation growing beneath the dense forest canopy. Its immense beak remained every bit as powerful as earlier researchers believed, yet that strength probably evolved for cracking resistant plant material instead of dispatching struggling prey. The largest beak known among birds became an instrument for processing food that many smaller herbivores could scarcely exploit, allowing Gastornis to occupy a specialized botanical niche. That revised interpretation carries consequences extending far beyond one remarkable bird. If Gastornis did not occupy the highest predatory role across the northern continents, then the apex position remained uncertain for much longer than than paleontologists once imagined. Rather than a landscape ruled by an obvious giant, the Paleocene may have supported smaller predators, sharing responsibilities that later ecosystems concentrated within single dominant hunters. The food web appears less dramatic at first glance, yet considerably more complex. Gastornis therefore offers one of the clearest reminders that fossils do not always reveal their stories immediately. Bones describe structure with remarkable precision, but behavior, diet, and ecological role often require additional evidence gathered through chemistry, microscopic analysis, and careful comparison with living organisms. The most imposing creature within an ecosystem does not automatically occupy its highest rank. Across the northern Paleocene, the absence of a confirmed giant apex predator may be one of the defining features of the entire age, leaving a throne that remained unexpectedly difficult to fill. Once Gastornis stepped away from the role of northern apex predator, the search for the true ruler of the Paleocene becomes unexpectedly difficult. The answer does not resemble a lion, a wolf, or any familiar hunter. It belongs to an evolutionary experiment unlike anything alive today, a lineage that blended features normally separated by millions of years of adaptation into one remarkably successful predator. These animals were the mesonychids. At first glance, their feet appeared suited for grazing mammals, ending in small hooves rather than grasping claws. Their heads told a different story. Powerful jaws carried sharp teeth adapted for slicing flesh, while robust skulls anchored muscles capable of delivering formidable bites. The combination seemed almost contradictory, yet for millions of years it proved entirely functional. Mesonychids hunted effectively across landscapes where few other large mammalian predators existed. Their earliest representatives almost certainly appeared in Asia during the beginning of the Paleocene. Fossils from that region preserve the most primitive members of the group, suggesting the lineage began its evolutionary journey there before expanding outward. Asian ecosystems of the time contained very few true carnivores, and the creodonts that would later become important predators had either not yet appeared or remained uncommon. With so little competition, mesonychids occupied the highest predatory positions across enormous stretches of the continent. Among their earliest successes was Dissicus, a predator roughly comparable in size to a modern coyote. Although modest beside later members of its family, Dissicus accomplished something extraordinary. Fossils reveal its presence across Asia, Europe, and North America, making it one of the most geographically widespread mammalian predators of the Paleocene. Few hunters of the age achieved such an extensive distribution, suggesting remarkable adaptability to forests, river valleys, and varied prey communities spread across the northern continents. Later members of the lineage reached far more imposing proportions. One of the most impressive was Ankylodon, discovered in rocks from the Middle Paleocene of what is now New Mexico. Its skull approached the size of that of a modern brown bear, making it the largest confirmed terrestrial predator known from North America during its time. Although supported by hoofed feet inherited from distant ancestors, its jaws and teeth reveal an animal thoroughly equipped for dispatching substantial prey. Anatomy that appears unusual today represented a perfectly workable solution within Paleocene ecosystems. Mesonychids therefore occupied a position unlike any other mammals before or since. They demonstrated that hooves did not inevitably lead toward grazing lifestyles, just as claws were not essential for becoming an apex hunter. Evolution repeatedly assembled body plans using available structures, refining inherited features into new purposes without following patterns that later ages would consider familiar. Their story, however, ended almost completely. No living species traces its ancestry to a mesonychid. As the Eocene unfolded, true carnivorous mammals expanded into ecological roles once dominated by these hoofed hunters. Improved limb anatomy, more specialized teeth, and increasingly efficient hunting strategies gradually shifted the balance. Animals that had scarcely existed while mesonychids ruled eventually replaced them across continent after continent. The disappearance of the mesonychids remains one of the Paleocene's defining ironies. They spread across three continents, occupied the closest thing the age possessed to a true apex predator, and flourished for millions of years. Yet their entire lineage vanished without leaving descendants, erased by competitors only slightly better suited to the same demanding occupation, leaving behind fossils that preserve the memory of an evolutionary path never taken again. Across the equatorial forests of the Paleocene, evolution reached a destination unlike anything unfolding farther north. While other continents still hosted changing communities where dominance shifted between competing lineages, the tropical lowlands of northern South America produced a predator whose authority leaves remarkably little room for debate. It did not rely upon speed, intelligence, or elaborate hunting strategies. Its greatest advantage was sheer physical scale, made possible by a climate unlike any that exists today. This extraordinary animal was Titanoboa cerrejonensis, the largest snake ever known to inhabit Earth. Its fossils were uncovered during 2009 within the Cerrejón coal mine of northern Colombia, revealing a species that lived approximately 58 to 60 million years ago. The discovery immediately transformed scientific understanding of Paleocene ecosystems, demonstrating that reptiles had achieved dimensions previously considered almost unimaginable. An average adult stretched approximately 42.7 feet from head to tail. For comparison, the largest living green anaconda typically reaches about 17 feet. Titanoboa exceeded that familiar giant by more than 2.5 times in length. Its immense body weighed close to 2,500 pounds, surpassing the mass of a modern compact automobile. No snake, before or since, has approached such proportions, making Titanoboa a singular achievement in vertebrate evolution. Its remarkable size emerged from the physical relationship between reptiles and their environment. As cold-blooded animals, snakes depend upon external temperatures to regulate metabolism. Warm surroundings allow larger bodies to function efficiently because heat remains available throughout daily activity and seasonal cycles. Paleontologists calculated that sustaining Titanoboa required average yearly temperatures between 86 and 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Independent climate reconstructions of the Paleocene tropics closely match those values, confirming that the surrounding environment possessed exactly the warmth needed to support such an immense predator. Confidence in these conclusions rests upon unusually rich fossil evidence. Researchers recovered 100 vertebrae representing 28 separate individuals from the Cerrejón Formation. Such an extensive collection allowed body proportions to be reconstructed with exceptional reliability, reducing much of the uncertainty that often surrounds extinct giants. Rather than depending upon a single, incomplete skeleton, scientists assembled their understanding from numerous specimens representing different stages of growth. The surrounding fossil community reveals an equally remarkable ecosystem. The Cerrejón Formation is recognized as the oldest known fossil site preserving a neotropical rainforest. Within its rocks lie giant turtles carrying shells nearly 6 feet across, enormous freshwater fish, and crocodile-like reptiles occupying rivers and wetlands. Together, they describe a flourishing tropical forest, sustained by abundant rainfall, towering vegetation, and waterways supporting extraordinary biological productivity. At the summit of that ecosystem stood Titanoboa. Its tremendous size alone allowed it to overpower prey unavailable to any other predator sharing its habitat. Powerful muscles wrapped around victims with overwhelming force before swallowing them whole, while broad rivers and swamps provided ideal hunting grounds where such an immense body could move with surprising efficiency. No convincing fossil evidence suggests another predator regularly challenged its position within these forests. Titanoboa therefore reached dominance through conditions that favored continual growth across countless generations. Warm temperatures removed physiological limits that constrain modern reptiles, while abundant prey supplied the energy needed to sustain unprecedented mass. The Paleocene tropics created circumstances where becoming the largest snake in Earth's history was not an evolutionary curiosity. Within that remarkable rainforest, it became a natural consequence of the world itself. Across the equator, another Paleocene story unfolded beyond the reach of the northern continents. Although the same extinction had marked the beginning of this age, South America followed an evolutionary path entirely its own. Oceans surrounded the continent on every side, preventing large land animals from arriving or departing. The struggles taking shape there belonged to an isolated world where survival depended only upon the creatures that had endured the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction within its shores. Isolation shaped every branch of life. Without a land bridge connecting South America to North America, there was no meaningful exchange of mammals, reptiles, or birds. Entire communities evolved without outside competitors interrupting their progress. Every predator, herbivore, and scavenger descended from survivors already present when the extinction ended. Evolution, therefore, worked with a limited collection of ancestral lineages, gradually transforming them into an ecosystem unlike any developing elsewhere on Earth. No single predator achieved unquestioned supremacy across this continent. Instead, four completely unrelated groups competed for the highest positions within the food web. Giant snakes led by Titanoboa shared the landscape with terrestrial crocodilians called sebecids, carnivorous marsupials known as sparacidonts, and the towering forest-wracid terror birds. Each lineage represented a separate evolutionary experiment, pursuing dominance through entirely different anatomy, hunting strategies, and ecological strengths. The sparacidonts illustrate this independence especially well. Descended from marsupials rather than placental mammals, they began as small hunters weighing less than a single pound. Across millions of years, they diversified into forms resembling foxes, wolverines, and eventually formidable saber-toothed predators. Their resemblance to northern placental carnivores emerged through convergent evolution, with unrelated ancestors arriving at comparable body plans because similar ecological demands favored similar anatomical solutions. Beneath those outward similarities, however, their evolutionary history remained entirely distinct. The terror birds followed another path altogether. Unlike Gastornis farther north, these birds were genuine carnivores whose fossil evidence consistently supports a predatory lifestyle. Strongly hooked beaks delivered tremendous force, while long muscular legs carried them swiftly across open ground. Depending upon the species, their height ranged from approximately 3 feet to well over 10 feet. The largest members possessed the strength to kill prey substantially larger than themselves, securing a prominent place among South America's dominant hunters. Sebecids added another formidable presence to this crowded contest. Although related to crocodilians, they differed greatly from the river-dwelling ambush predators familiar today. Long legs, supported bodies, adapted for movement across land, allowing them to pursue prey through forests and floodplains instead of waiting beneath the water's surface. Alongside them moved Titanoboa, ruling wetlands and river systems with unmatched size, while terror birds and sparacidonts exploited different opportunities across the same landscapes. The remarkable feature of this ecosystem lies in its balance. None of these four predator groups eliminated the others. Each maintained enough success to endure while preventing complete dominance by any rival. Geographic isolation preserved that equilibrium because no powerful newcomers could arrive, carrying entirely different evolutionary advantages. For tens of millions of years, competition continued without decisive resolution. South America's Paleocene therefore reveals that ecological instability does not always end with the rise of a single unquestioned ruler. Sometimes an ecosystem remains divided among several capable claimants, each occupying part of the highest ground while limiting the expansion of every competitor. Within this isolated continent, the brutal age became a prolonged contest, sustained by separation itself, allowing four extraordinary predator lineages to share a throne that none could fully possess. Beyond the shorelines, another struggle unfolded beneath the surface of the Paleocene seas. The upheaval that reshaped the continents had reached every ocean as well, sweeping away rulers that had commanded marine ecosystems for tens of millions of years. Water covered most of the planet, yet even that immense realm found itself without established masters, beginning a long interval when survival depended upon whichever survivors could adapt most quickly to an emptied world. The extinction erased the great marine reptiles that had dominated the closing chapters of the Cretaceous. Mosasaurs, stretching nearly 56 feet, disappeared entirely, along with the remaining plesiosaurs and the already declining ichthyosaurs. These enormous predators had occupied the highest levels of the marine food web, regulating countless populations beneath them. Their disappearance created an ecological vacancy spanning tropical seas, coastal shelves, and open oceans. Nothing immediately possessed the size or specialization needed to replace them. Among the first beneficiaries were the dinosaurs, long-snouted crocodilians already adapted to life along coastlines and shallow marine environments. Having survived the extinction, they expanded across warm ocean basins during the early Paleocene with remarkably little competition from other large predators. Some species reached lengths approaching 18 feet, using streamlined bodies and narrow jaws to capture fish and other aquatic prey. For a time, they represented the closest equivalent to dominant marine hunters in a world still recovering from catastrophe. Freshwater ecosystems followed a different course. Rivers winding across what is now North Dakota supported Champsosaurus gigas, a reptile whose elongated snout resembled that of a modern gharial while belonging to an entirely separate lineage. Rather than shrinking after the extinction, this species exceeded the size of its Cretaceous relatives, growing beyond 11 feet in length. Its success demonstrates that evolutionary responses to global upheaval were never identical across every habitat. Some reptile groups continued expanding where ecological opportunities remained available. Sharks also entered a period of steady transformation. Numerous lineages had survived the extinction, allowing them to spread into marine roles previously occupied by the vanished reptiles. Even so, the Paleocene seas did not yet contain the enormous specialized sharks that would dominate later chapters of Earth's history. Instead, many species remained moderate in size, exploiting available prey while marine ecosystems gradually reorganized themselves. The oceans therefore became landscapes of adaptable opportunists rather than kingdoms ruled by unmistakable giants. Along riverbanks bordering the ancient Tethys Sea, another story had begun almost unnoticed. In regions that are now Pakistan and India, small hoofed mammals belonging to the even toed ungulate lineage spent increasing amounts of time near the water. Fish offered dependable nourishment, while shallow channels and muddy estuaries provided new feeding grounds. Generation after generation, these mammals ventured farther into aquatic environments, each modest adjustment laying the foundation for one of evolution's greatest transformations. Nothing about those early animals suggested the future awaiting their descendants. They remained land mammals in appearance and behavior, carrying weight upon four legs and returning to solid ground after feeding. Yet natural selection had already begun favoring traits that improved movement through water, gradually redirecting an ordinary lineage toward an extraordinary destiny. The whale, therefore, began neither in the open ocean nor among creatures already adapted for permanent aquatic life. Its story opened upon a Paleocene shoreline where an unremarkable hoofed mammal explored the water's edge. Around it, marine ecosystems still searched for lasting rulers, unaware that one of the greatest would eventually arrive from the land itself. The boundaries shaping the Paleocene were written long before any predator or herbivore took its place upon the recovering Earth. Continents were still wandering across the planet, carrying their inhabitants like isolated worlds adrift upon immense tectonic plates. Every coastline, narrowing sea, and widening ocean determined where life could travel and where it remained forever confined. Geography became an invisible force directing evolution as surely as climate or natural selection. The planet itself looked strikingly different from the modern globe. The Atlantic Ocean remained considerably narrower than it is today. India existed as a large island continent, moving steadily northward toward Asia at roughly 8 inches each year. Australia still shared a southern connection with Antarctica, while South America remained completely separated from North America by broad tropical waters. None of these arrangements lasted forever, yet throughout the Paleocene they profoundly influenced the paths available to every lineage. These shifting continents were not passive scenery behind Earth's biological recovery. Every ocean channel and mountain-free coastline acted as a barrier, deciding which species could disperse and which remained isolated for millions of years. Evolution therefore unfolded as a series of separate experiments rather than one continuous global process. Populations divided by water accumulated unique adaptations, filling ecological opportunities without interference from distant competitors, following entirely different evolutionary trajectories. North America and Europe occasionally escaped that isolation. Temporary land connections formed across portions of what is now the North Atlantic, allowing waves of mammals to cross between the continents before rising seas separated them once more. This intermittent exchange explains why Dissicus appears in fossil deposits from both Wyoming and France, dating to essentially the same interval. Its remarkable distribution reflected changing geography as much as biological success, demonstrating how brief corridors could reshape entire faunas before disappearing again. Farther south, no comparable route existed. South America's prolonged isolation preserved its extraordinary contest among sparacodonts, terror birds, giant snakes, and sebecid crocodilians. Those predators never encountered the mesonychids expanding across northern continents, nor the creodonts beginning their gradual rise elsewhere. For approximately 60 million years, South America remained an evolutionary island where local lineages competed only against one another. producing ecological relationships found nowhere else on Earth. Asia developed another distinctive story. Mesonychids flourished across many regions, while early herbivorous mammals and primitive primates followed evolutionary paths, unlike those emerging in Europe or North America. Geographic separation encouraged different anatomical solutions to familiar ecological challenges, proving that similar environments could produce very different communities when isolated by oceans and distance. Several versions of the Paleocene therefore existed simultaneously, each responding independently to the same planetary recovery. Yet the continents themselves never stopped moving. India continued its relentless journey toward Asia, carrying ecosystems destined to merge when the collision eventually closed the Tethys Sea and lifted the Himalayas. South America drifted gradually closer to North America, although their famous land connection remained far in the future. The tectonic plates slowly positioned these isolated biological worlds for encounters that would later transform global biodiversity. During the Paleocene, however, those future meetings had not yet arrived. Oceans remained wide enough to preserve separate evolutionary arenas, preventing any single lineage from extending its influence across the entire planet. Earth's recovering ecosystems, therefore, advanced along parallel paths, each continent nurturing its own claimants to ecological dominance. The age was never governed by one universal struggle. It consisted of several unfolding at once, separated by drifting continents that ensured no victor could claim the whole world. Among the mammals spreading across Paleocene landscapes, one group seemed destined to define the future. Their fossils appeared in remarkable numbers, occupying forests, floodplains, and open woodlands across much of the northern continents. They adapted rapidly to changing conditions and diversified with astonishing speed. Looking only at the beginning of their story, it would have been easy to imagine that the age belonged to them. Instead, their history became one of evolution's most striking dead ends. These mammals were the condylarths, a diverse collection of hoofed animals occupying an intermediate stage between ancestral omnivores and the more specialized herbivores that would flourish later. Their feet had already begun the transition toward weight-bearing hooves suited for longer travel across firm ground. Their teeth, however, still reflected an older inheritance. Many retained broad, generalized dentition capable of processing fruits, leaves, insects, and small animals rather than committing fully to grazing or browsing. They represented an evolutionary compromise, carrying features from two different ways of life at once. The pace of their expansion was extraordinary. Within the first million years following the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, condylarths already occupied a remarkable range of body sizes throughout North America. Fossils from the earliest Paleocene Puercan fauna include species no larger than squirrels, alongside others approaching the size of sheep. Such diversity emerged with unusual speed, filling ecological opportunities that had stood empty after the disappearance of many older lineages. Other mammal groups required millions of additional years to achieve comparable variation. Their evolutionary importance reaches beyond their own success. Some distant branches within the broader condylarth assemblage eventually contributed ancestry to later hoofed mammals, including the lineages leading toward horses, rhinoceroses, and tapirs. These relationships remain indirect rather than straightforward. Modern species do not descend from recognizable condylarth families preserved in the fossil record. Instead, the connection resembles an early branching point, with later descendants following paths that gradually departed from their generalized ancestors. Most condylarth families experienced a different fate. They spread across North America and Europe, occupied numerous ecological roles, and endured for millions of years before disappearing entirely. As the Eocene progressed, increasingly specialized mammals entered many of the same environments. Herbivores developed more efficient feeding adaptations, while predators became better equipped to exploit available prey. Generalized body plans that once encouraged flexibility gradually became disadvantages within ecosystems, growing more competitive and more finely divided into specialized niches. Their disappearance illustrates an important principle of evolution. Rapid diversification alone offers no guarantee of lasting success. The Paleocene rewarded lineages capable of expanding swiftly into vacant habitats, yet those early achievements remained vulnerable as ecological relationships became increasingly complex. Natural selection continually favored improvements in feeding, movement, reproduction, and survival. Groups unable to keep pace eventually surrendered positions they had once occupied with remarkable abundance. The condylarths therefore stand as evidence that evolutionary triumph can prove remarkably temporary. They flourished across continents, produced impressive diversity, and appeared to establish enduring foundations for mammalian life. Even so, most of their families vanished before the close of the Eocene, leaving no direct descendants that survived into the modern world. Their fossils remain widespread, while their bloodlines do not. Their history also explains why the Paleocene never settled into lasting stability. Again and again, expanding lineages seemed ready to establish enduring ecological dynasties. Each time, changing environments or improving competitors altered the balance before dominance could become permanent. The condylarths embodied that recurring pattern, rising with extraordinary speed, only to discover that in the Paleocene, early success rarely guaranteed an enduring future. High above the crowded forest floor, another evolutionary story unfolded beyond the reach of the continent's largest predators. Branches woven into an almost continuous canopy formed an elevated landscape where leaves, fruit, flowers, and insects supported creatures rarely seen from below. Among them appeared a lineage so small and seemingly insignificant that nothing about its existence suggested it would one day reshape the history of Earth. The earliest primates emerged during the Middle Paleocene within these expansive tropical forests that blanketed much of the northern hemisphere. They measured little more than the size of modern mice or rats, spending nearly their entire lives among branches instead of on the ground. Fruits, insects, nectar, and other small food sources sustained them. Activity probably occurred mostly after sunset, reducing encounters with larger hunters while allowing them to move through the canopy with little disturbance. Their world occupied the same forests as the great ecological contests already unfolding, yet existed almost entirely apart from them. Several defining characteristics of the primate lineage were already taking shape. Their eyes faced forward, allowing overlapping fields of vision that greatly improved depth perception. Within a three-dimensional forest canopy where every leap required precise judgment, that ability offered an enormous advantage. Their hands and feet developed grasping digits capable of securing branches from many different angles, while flexible joints supported agile climbing instead of rapid running across open ground. Relative to body size, their brains also grew larger than those of most contemporary mammals, providing greater sensory integration and increasingly refined movement. These animals were neither lemurs nor monkeys, and they stood far removed from later apes. They belonged to an earlier chapter in primate evolution, preserving a body plan still assembling the characteristics that would eventually distinguish the entire order from every other group of mammals. Much of what later became familiar had not yet fully emerged. Their anatomy represented possibility more than completion, carrying traits that natural selection would continue refining across millions of years. Evidence for these pioneers remains exceptionally scarce. Small skeletons rarely survive the immense passage of geological time, and dense forest environments seldom preserve the sedimentary conditions needed for fossilization. As a result, paleontologists often depend upon isolated teeth recovered from rock formations in places that are now Wyoming, France, and China. Teeth preserve remarkably well because enamel resists decay, and even tiny fragments record details of diet, evolutionary relationships, and anatomical change unavailable from other sources. From those scattered discoveries, scientists have reconstructed mammals that spent the Paleocene avoiding attention rather than commanding it. Their greatest protection came from remaining inconspicuous within the canopy, while larger animals competed across rivers, floodplains, and forest floors. Survival depended upon agility, careful movement through branches, and access to food unavailable to heavier ground dwelling species. They occupied an ecological refuge created by height instead of physical strength. Nothing in their appearance suggested future dominance. They possessed no crushing jaws, towering bodies, or overwhelming speed. Their continued existence resulted from characteristics that happened to fit the conditions of the recovering Paleocene, allowing them to persist while many larger lineages struggled through changing environments. That persistence became one of evolution's most consequential accidents. Small bodies, life among branches, grasping hands, expanding brains, and forward facing vision carried this modest lineage safely through an age that rewarded many very different strategies. From those overlooked forest dwellers eventually came every monkey, every ape, and every human being, descendants of creatures whose greatest achievement during the Paleocene was surviving long enough for history to unfold. Some places preserve more than fossils. They preserve an entire living world, capturing countless relationships at a single moment in Earth's history. The Sarajevo Formation of northern Colombia offers exactly that kind of window. Layer by layer, it records the oldest complete portrait of a Paleocene tropical ecosystem yet discovered, revealing that the environment surrounding Titanoboa was every bit as extraordinary as the giant snake itself. The rocks of Sarajevo are now recognized as the oldest known fossil site preserving a neotropical rainforest. Between approximately 60 million and 58 million years ago, forests resembling the broad architectural design of today's Amazon had already emerged within this Colombian basin. Towering vegetation, abundant rainfall, humid air, and remarkable biological diversity combined to create a mature rainforest ecosystem far sooner than scientists once expected after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. Titanoboa shared this flourishing environment with an impressive collection of aquatic animals. More than 100 fossil vertebrae belonging to the giant snake have been recovered, demonstrating that it was a well-established member of the local ecosystem rather than an isolated curiosity. Swimming through the same waterways were enormous freshwater turtles carrying shells nearly 6 feet across, the largest known from the Paleocene. Their abundance suggests rivers capable of supporting large populations across many generations, reflecting an ecosystem rich in available resources from its smallest inhabitants upward. The foundation of that abundance rested within the water itself. Massive lungfish, together with numerous large river fish, formed a dependable source of food for the region's largest predators. Nutrients flowing through tropical rivers sustained dense aquatic communities which in turn supported reptiles of exceptional size. Instead of depending upon occasional opportunities, the food web operated continuously through remarkable freshwater productivity, allowing giant hunters to persist because equally substantial prey remained available throughout the ecosystem. Even formidable crocodile relatives occupied a lower position than might be expected. Dirosaurid reptiles inhabited the same rivers and wetlands as Titanoboa, equipped with adaptations that would have made them dominant predators in many other periods of Earth's history. Within Cerrejón, however, they existed alongside an animal exceeding them in mass. The balance of power shifted toward the immense snake, illustrating how local ecological conditions could overturn expectations established elsewhere across the recovering planet. Plant fossils preserved throughout the formation complete this remarkable picture. Large-leaved trees, early palms, and primitive relatives of many modern tropical hardwood families already formed layered forests, resembling those covering equatorial regions today. Their presence demonstrates that the structural framework of the modern tropical rainforest had already become established during the Paleocene. Multiple vegetation levels created habitats supporting insects, reptiles, birds, mammals, and aquatic communities within a remarkably intricate ecological network. Cerrejón therefore preserves far more than the remains of extraordinary reptiles. It reveals an ecosystem functioning with impressive stability and complexity, despite existing only a few million years after Earth's greatest biological crisis. Food webs, forest architecture, and diverse aquatic communities had already reached remarkable maturity, demonstrating how thoroughly life had reorganized itself within favorable tropical climates. That flourishing world nevertheless proved temporary. As global temperatures gradually declined toward the close of the Paleocene, environmental conditions supporting giants like Titanoboa changed with them. The rainforest endured, but the ecological balance shifted enough that its largest ruler disappeared. Cerrejón remains as a record of an entire tropical world operating at full strength, preserved within stone after only a modest cooling altered the course of its history. After millions of years defined by rapid change, the pace of the Paleocene began to soften. The restless expansion that had characterized the earliest recovery gradually settled into more recognizable ecological patterns. Communities still evolved, species still appeared and disappeared, yet many ecosystems were beginning to resemble lasting biological networks instead of temporary collections of opportunistic survivors. Across several continents, the first signs of enduring ecological structure emerged. Food webs reflected this growing stability. Predator and prey relationships became increasingly consistent, with species occupying more specialized positions than before. Herbivores focused on particular food sources, while carnivores developed body plans better suited to pursuing specific kinds of prey. Ecological layers deepened as each lineage filled a narrower role within the larger community. The broad flexibility that had allowed early Paleocene animals to exploit nearly any opportunity slowly gave way to more organized interactions capable of supporting greater biological diversity. Among the clearest symbols of this transition were the euantathers. These large mammals approached the size of modern rhinoceroses and carried paired bony projections across their skulls, giving them a distinctive appearance unlike any living animal. Their great bulk signaled something important about the recovering world. Forests and floodplains now produced enough vegetation to sustain herbivores of genuine size, while ecological conditions had remained sufficiently stable for populations of such demanding animals to persist across many generations. Large predators also became increasingly established. Creodonts spread through several regions during the late Paleocene, developing into consistent mammalian hunters ranging from weasel-sized species to forms approaching the size of bears. Although they left no direct living descendants, they represented the closest approximation yet to a dependable guild of large mammalian carnivores. Instead of scattered generalists competing for every available meal, ecosystems increasingly contained predators adapted to occupying recognizable positions near the top of local food chains. Evidence for this gradual transformation appears with remarkable clarity within the Bighorn Basin of present day Wyoming. Layer upon layer of floodplain sediments accumulated across millions of years, preserving one of the richest records of Paleocene ecological change anywhere on Earth. Fossils recovered throughout these deposits reveal communities becoming progressively larger, more varied, and more specialized through time. The sequence documents an unmistakable movement away from the instability that followed the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction toward ecosystems displaying many characteristics familiar from later epochs. Mammalian evolution reflected the same direction. Body sizes generally increased as food resources became more dependable, while ecological communities grew richer through the appearance of additional, specialized forms. Herbivores diversified into distinct feeding strategies. Predators refined hunting adaptations. Small mammals occupied increasingly precise ecological niches. The explosive experimentation that had defined earlier millions of years gradually matured into a more sustainable arrangement where individual species relied upon increasingly stable relationships with one another. For the first time since the extinction, Earth's recovering biosphere seemed capable of supporting long-lasting ecological balance. Plant communities, herbivores, carnivores, and scavengers all occupied positions that complemented one another with growing consistency. The world appeared to be constructing biological systems durable enough to endure well beyond the uncertainties that had shaped the opening chapters of the Paleocene. Yet this emerging stability rested upon conditions that would not remain unchanged. At almost the very moment Earth's ecosystems approached lasting organization, the planet entered another profound transformation. Unlike the catastrophe that had ended the age of dinosaurs, this change arrived through shifting climate instead of impact, but its influence would again reach every continent, reshaping the course of life with remarkable completeness. Just as Earth's recovering ecosystems began to resemble something enduring, the planet entered another period of extraordinary upheaval. This transformation arrived without an asteroid and without a sudden global darkness. It unfolded through the atmosphere itself, as an immense pulse of carbon spread across the planet. By about 56 million years ago, at the boundary between the Paleocene and Eocene, a world that had spent nearly 10 million years rebuilding found itself confronting another profound disruption. This event is known as the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, a geologically brief interval of extreme global warming lasting roughly 200,000 years. During that comparatively short span, average global temperatures climbed by approximately 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Earth had already remained considerably warmer than the modern planet throughout much of the Paleocene. The additional warming pushed climates into conditions unfamiliar to every large land animal then living, forcing ecosystems beyond the limits under which they had gradually organized themselves. Scientists continue investigating the ultimate source of this enormous release of carbon. One possibility points toward widespread volcanic activity associated with the North Atlantic igneous province, where immense eruptions may have injected vast quantities of carbon into the atmosphere. Another proposes that warming oceans destabilized methane hydrates resting upon the seafloor, releasing stored carbon through a powerful feedback process that intensified the climate shift. Both mechanisms may have contributed together. Although the precise trigger remains debated, the scale of the environmental change itself is firmly established. The oceans responded rapidly. As increasing amounts of carbon dissolved into seawater, ocean chemistry changed faster than many marine organisms could accommodate. Deep sea benthic foraminifera, tiny shelled organisms that had slowly rebuilt their populations following the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, experienced another severe decline. Significant numbers disappeared once again, demonstrating how even microscopic life remained vulnerable when planetary conditions shifted more rapidly than evolution could compensate. Conditions on land transformed with similar speed. Tropical forests expanded toward higher latitudes as cooler climatic zones retreated. Regions that had supported dense rainforest gradually became more arid, allowing deserts to spread into landscapes that previously sustained abundant vegetation. Rainfall patterns reorganized across continents, altering rivers, floodplains, and forests that had taken millions of years to develop. Ecological communities carefully assembled during the late Paleocene suddenly found themselves occupying climates unlike those under which they had evolved. The biological consequences proved extensive without matching the total devastation of the earlier extinction. Many species survived, adapting through migration, changing diets, or shifting ecological relationships. Others disappeared from portions of their former ranges as new competitors expanded into altered environments. Rather than eliminating most life, the warming reshuffled ecosystems across nearly every continent, replacing long established communities with different combinations of plants and animals better suited to the changing climate. This distinction matters deeply within Earth's history. The Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum was not another mass extinction comparable to the catastrophe that ended the age of dinosaurs. It represented a global reorganization occurring before recovery from the previous crisis had fully matured. Ecological stability had only recently begun to emerge when climatic disruption interrupted that gradual progress. The Paleocene therefore closed without the lasting balance its final millions of years had seemed ready to achieve. Instead, rising temperatures carried the planet into another age of sweeping transformation, reminding every lineage that even a recovering world remained subject to forces operating far beyond the reach of any single species. No living group experienced the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum in exactly the same way. The warming spread across the entire planet, yet every ecosystem answered differently according to its climate, geography, and resident species. Some lineages adapted with remarkable speed. Others declined despite millions of years of previous success. The event became a worldwide measure of biological flexibility, revealing which forms of life could adjust while the environment changed around them. Among land mammals, one of the clearest responses appeared in body size. Sustained heat favored smaller animals because compact bodies released excess warmth more efficiently than larger ones. Fossils preserve this pattern with unusual precision in the earliest known horse, Cyphripus. Teeth collected from rock layers in Wyoming show that individuals lost approximately 30% of their body mass during the warmest interval of the event. As temperatures gradually declined afterward, average body size increased again by roughly 76%, producing one of the best documented examples of climate-driven size change known from the fossil record. Movement across continents also accelerated. As cooler climatic zones shifted toward higher latitudes, countless species followed the changing conditions. Migration routes that had remained blocked for millions of years opened as suitable habitats expanded into new regions. Mammals, reptiles, birds, and plants mixed with neighboring communities that had long remained separated by climate rather than oceans or mountains. These encounters created entirely new ecological combinations that would shape the character of the early Eocene across much of the world. Some groups entered this period already weakened. The condylarths had flourished during the Paleocene before increasingly specialized competitors reduced their advantages. The rapid transformation of forests and plant communities during the warming dealt another severe challenge to animals dependent upon ecological stability. Many surviving condylarth lineages failed to endure the disruption intact, and their long decline accelerated as familiar food resources shifted or disappeared across changing landscapes. Other predators adapted more successfully. Creodonts possessed broad dietary flexibility and remained less tightly bound to particular prey than several competing carnivorous groups. That versatility allowed many of them to persist while ecological communities reorganized. Emerging from the thermal event, they occupied the role of dominant mammalian predators across wide regions of the early Eocene, achieving a position that no mammalian hunting lineage had held consistently throughout the Paleocene. High within expanding forests, the earliest primates also benefited from changing conditions. Their small bodies demanded relatively modest food supplies, while their varied diet allowed them to exploit insects, fruit, flowers, and other resources as vegetation changed. Warming climates extended tropical forests into higher latitudes, enlarging the habitats these adaptable mammals already occupied. Traits that had once merely supported survival among branches now became important advantages within rapidly changing environments. The Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum therefore rewarded adjustment more consistently than physical power. Ecological dominance offered limited protection when temperatures, rainfall, forests, and food webs all changed together. Lineages capable of altering their behavior, diet, distribution, or body size generally fared better than those tied closely to a single way of life. Across roughly 200,000 years, the warming reshaped nearly every ecosystem on Earth without producing another mass extinction. By the time global temperatures eased, many familiar communities had disappeared, replaced by new biological partnerships assembled through movement, adaptation, and survival. The world entering the Eocene still carried echoes of the Paleocene, yet its living inhabitants had already been sorted by one enduring quality: the capacity to change when the planet itself refused to remain the same. Across the separated continents of the Paleocene, life conducted the same experiment again and again. Oceans prevented animals from meeting, mountains divided populations, and drifting landmasses kept ecosystems isolated for millions of years. Even so, remarkably similar creatures emerged in places that shared no direct biological contact. The repeated appearance of comparable forms became one of the strongest demonstrations that evolution often follows familiar pathways when confronted with similar ecological challenges. One striking example appeared among giant flightless birds. In the northern hemisphere, Gastornis evolved into an imposing terrestrial bird, occupying a prominent ecological position within recovering forests. Far away in South America, an entirely unrelated lineage, known as the Forest-Racids, followed its own evolutionary journey toward the role of large, flightless predator. These birds shared no close ancestry and developed on continents separated by broad oceans, Yet each lineage arrived at a remarkably similar solution to the opportunities available after the disappearance of dominant reptilian competitors. Comparable patterns appeared among mammalian hunters. South America's Sparacidonts independently evolved elongated saber, like canine teeth, suited for delivering powerful killing bites. Millions of years later, placental carnivores in North America developed strikingly similar anatomical features through completely separate evolutionary histories. Marsupials and placental mammals began from different inherited body plans, carried different genetic foundations, and remained isolated by an ocean, lacking any land connection. Nevertheless, both produced predators equipped with nearly identical hunting adaptations because they occupied comparable ecological roles. Large plant eating mammals reveal another example of this repeated pattern. South America produced the notangulates, while northern continents gave rise to hoofed mammals descending from condylarth ancestors. Though unrelated, these animals gradually acquired body proportions resembling those of later horses and rhinoceroses. Similar feeding strategies, comparable body sizes, and equivalent environmental pressures encouraged parallel solutions despite the absence of shared ancestry beyond distant mammalian origins. Evolution repeatedly shaped different raw materials into broadly familiar forms whenever similar ecological demands emerged. Such recurring outcomes are far more than coincidence. Every ecosystem operates within the same physical realities governing energy use, movement, feeding efficiency, and predator prey interactions. Large herbivores require digestive systems capable of processing abundant vegetation. Successful apex predators benefit from powerful jaws, effective senses, and efficient locomotion. Regardless of which lineage first occupies an ecological opportunity, natural selection repeatedly favors body plans capable of performing those tasks well. The process resembles different builders independently discovering the same practical design because the underlying engineering problem remains unchanged. The Paleocene, therefore, demonstrates an important distinction between species and ecological roles. Particular animals were never guaranteed to exist. Countless evolutionary paths disappeared forever after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, while others emerged unexpectedly from surviving lineages. Even so, ecosystems consistently required large herbivores, efficient carnivores, agile climbers, aquatic hunters, and numerous other specialized forms. Whenever those positions stood vacant, evolution gradually filled them, using whichever organisms happened to be available upon each isolated continent. This realization reaches beyond the fossil record into broader questions about the nature of life's history. Chance clearly influenced which lineages survived catastrophe, drifted across continents, or disappeared without descendants. At the same time, recurring evolutionary patterns suggest that many biological solutions remain surprisingly predictable once environmental conditions establish the problems requiring resolution. The Paleocene reveals a world where history and necessity worked together, allowing different creatures separated by oceans to arrive, again and again, at remarkably similar destinations through entirely independent journeys. Some chapters of Earth's history announce themselves with towering skeletons and museum halls filled with complete giants. Others survive only as scattered traces, requiring extraordinary patience to assemble into a coherent picture. The Paleocene belongs firmly to the second kind. Its absence from popular imagination reflects neither a lack of importance nor a shortage of scientific discovery, but the uncommon geological circumstances that shaped how its evidence reached the present. Rock formations, preserving Paleocene life, are less common and generally less accessible than those representing the Cretaceous beneath them or the Eocene above. Rich fossil deposits depend upon particular combinations of rivers, floodplains, lakes, burial, and long term preservation. During much of the Paleocene, those favorable conditions developed less frequently than in neighboring intervals. Countless ecosystems flourished, changed, and disappeared without leaving the extensive fossil archives that later generations of scientists would have preferred to examine. Among the most valuable exceptions stands the Bighorn Basin of Wyoming. There, countless layers of ancient floodplain sediments accumulated across approximately 10 million years, preserving one of the clearest continuous records of mammalian evolution anywhere on Earth. Fossils recovered from these rocks document the gradual rebuilding of ecosystems after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction and reveal subtle evolutionary transitions that would remain invisible within shorter geological records. Even with its exceptional importance, the site remains familiar primarily to researchers rather than the wider public. Most Paleocene species are known through remarkably incomplete remains. Paleontologists frequently work from isolated teeth, fragments of jaws, portions of limb bones, or scattered vertebrae separated by great distances and immense spans of time. A single tooth may preserve enough distinctive anatomy to identify an entirely unknown lineage, while a partial ankle or shoulder bone can reveal how an animal moved through its environment. Entire body plans often emerge through careful comparison of fossils recovered over decades from many different localities, each new discovery adding another small piece to an enormous puzzle. This fragmentary record inevitably limits what can be reconstructed. Many animals almost certainly left no recognizable fossils at all, while others remain represented by only a handful of specimens. The diversity already documented, therefore, almost certainly understates the true richness of Paleocene life. Every new excavation holds the possibility of revealing lineages, ecological relationships, or anatomical forms that have remained concealed since the earliest age of mammals. Public recognition has also been shaped by appearance. The Paleocene produced few complete skeletons capable of dominating museum galleries in the manner of enormous dinosaurs. There is no towering Tyrannosaurus rex equivalent welcoming visitors beneath dramatic lighting, nor a perfectly preserved skeleton representing the epoch's most influential mammals. Instead, many of its greatest discoveries reside inside drawers, holding carefully labeled teeth, bone fragments, and delicate fossils whose scientific value far exceeds their visual spectacle. That scarcity forms part of the Paleocene's own story. Ecosystems changed rapidly as lineages rose, disappeared, and were replaced across recovering landscapes. Geological processes capable of preserving complete communities often failed to keep pace with this continual ecological turnover. The age devoted to rebuilding life left comparatively modest physical reminders of how that rebuilding unfolded. Even so, the evidence already recovered has transformed scientific understanding of mammalian history. If such remarkable insights have emerged from scattered fragments preserved by uncommon geological fortune, the complete story almost certainly extends far beyond what the present fossil record has yet revealed, waiting patiently within rocks that remain unexplored. Across the Paleocene, powerful hunters appeared again and again, each seeming ready to establish lasting supremacy. Their bodies grew larger, their hunting abilities became more refined, and new predators emerged on continent after continent. Yet none achieved the enduring, ecosystem-shaping dominance once held by Tyrannosaurus rex. For nearly 10 million years, the highest position within Earth's terrestrial ecosystems remained remarkably unsettled, making this prolonged vacancy one of the epoch's most intriguing scientific puzzles. Several lineages approached that position without fully securing it. Mesonychids expanded across parts of Asia and North America as formidable mammalian hunters. South America produced giant, flightless predatory birds capable of controlling many local food webs. During the later Paleocene, creodonts increasingly occupied large carnivorous roles across several regions. Each lineage succeeded within particular environments, yet none established stable dominance across broad continents or maintained ecological control comparable to the great predators of the Cretaceous. One important explanation lies among the animals they hunted. Herbivorous mammals diversified at extraordinary speed throughout the Paleocene, constantly producing new combinations of body size, feeding behavior, and habitat preference. Communities rarely remained unchanged for extended periods. Predators attempting to specialize upon a dependable prey base often faced continual ecological turnover as potential prey evolved, expanded into new environments, or declined. Successful hunters, therefore, benefited from remaining adaptable instead of becoming tightly linked to any single group of herbivores whose future remained uncertain. The physical structure of the landscape imposed another powerful limitation. Much of the Paleocene land surface remained covered by extensive forests whose closed canopies restricted visibility and movement. Such environments rewarded concealment, climbing ability, opportunistic feeding, and short distance attacks far more effectively than prolonged pursuit across open terrain. Ecological conditions, therefore, favored versatile predators, capable of exploiting many food sources while discouraging the development of body plans associated with sustained high-speed chases that later characterized several dominant carnivorous mammals. Climate added another layer of instability. Throughout the Paleocene, global warmth combined with repeated fluctuations in rainfall and regional environmental conditions. Forests expanded, contracted, and shifted across continents as climates gradually changed. Rivers altered their courses, wetlands appeared and disappeared, and vegetation communities reorganized repeatedly. Predators adapting successfully to one ecological arrangement often encountered a different landscape before millions of years of stable predator-prey relationships could firmly establish long-lasting dominance. Taken together, these influences created an unusual evolutionary circumstance. Powerful hunters certainly existed, but the ecological foundation supporting permanent supremacy never remained fixed for long. Each time a lineage appeared capable of consolidating control, the surrounding environment continued changing beneath it. Ecological opportunities drifted across time and geography, preventing any single predator from maintaining unquestioned authority throughout the epoch. Viewed from this perspective, the apparently empty throne represented neither evolutionary failure nor biological weakness. Instead, the position itself continually shifted as ecosystems rebuilt, following the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction and responded to changing climates. Every aspiring ruler pursued a target that refused to remain in one place long enough to be permanently claimed. That prolonged instability ultimately enriched the history of life. Without one overwhelmingly dominant predator directing ecological relationships for millions of years, numerous hunting strategies, herbivorous adaptations, and survival techniques continued evolving side by side. The Paleocene's moving throne fostered remarkable biological diversity, laying much of the evolutionary foundation upon which the ecosystems of the Eocene and every succeeding epoch would eventually be constructed. The Paleocene did not leave behind a single dominant dynasty that endured into the modern world. Instead, it produced generations of lineages that rose, flourished for a time, and disappeared. Their apparent failures concealed a deeper achievement. Every ecological struggle, every replacement, and every vanished branch altered the evolutionary landscape for those that followed. Long before the modern world existed, the Paleocene had already begun assembling many of its essential foundations. The condylarths illustrate this hidden influence. Most of their lineages eventually disappeared without direct descendants surviving into the present. Yet their long occupation of herbivorous niches shaped the environments in which later hoofed mammals evolved. Competition for food, movement across changing landscapes, and continual ecological adjustment refine the selective pressures acting upon emerging ungulates. Horses, rhinoceroses, cattle, and many other familiar grazing mammals inherited ecosystems that had already been transformed by millions of years of condylarth experimentation. Predatory mammals reveal a similar sequence. Mesonychids became formidable hunters across parts of Asia and North America before gradually declining. Their presence influenced the evolution of competing carnivorous lineages, including the creodonts, whose own success eventually yielded to the rise of the true carnivores that dominate terrestrial ecosystems today. Each transition reshaped predator-prey relationships, encouraging increasingly efficient hunting strategies without any single dynasty remaining permanently established. South America followed its own distinctive path. Giant flightless terror birds occupied the role of dominant terrestrial predators for tens of millions of years, limiting opportunities for large placental carnivores to evolve upon that isolated continent. Much later, after the formation of the Panama Land Bridge connected North and South America, placental predators dispersed southward into ecosystems that had developed under very different evolutionary conditions. The resulting interchange transformed entire communities and contributed to one of the most dramatic reorganizations of continental animal life preserved within the fossil record. Even Titanoboa continues contributing to scientific understanding despite vanishing millions of years ago. Its extraordinary size provides evidence that tropical climates during the Paleocene remained considerably warmer than those of the present day. Climate researchers compare these ancient conditions with evidence preserved in rocks, sediments, and fossil organisms to improve models describing the relationship between atmospheric carbon dioxide and tropical temperatures. In this way, a giant snake that disappeared roughly 60 million years ago still informs investigations into Earth's changing climate. Small primates also carried unexpected consequences. Their survival depended upon agility among branches, flexible diets, keen vision, and increasingly sophisticated coordination within complex forest habitats. Generation after generation, these pressures favored improved perception, refined grasping ability, and greater neurological capacity. Those gradual adaptations served immediate needs within Paleocene forests, yet they also established characteristics that would remain central throughout later primate evolution, eventually contributing to the remarkable cognitive abilities of distant descendants capable of studying this forgotten epoch. Viewed together, these examples reveal that the Paleocene shaped the future through continual replacement rather than permanent success. Many of its dominant animals disappeared completely, while others survived only as distant echoes within later lineages. Their importance rested less in their individual destinies than in the evolutionary pathways they opened for those that followed. The epoch's relentless competition therefore accomplished something larger than any single lineage could achieve alone. Every adaptation tested, every ecological role contested, and every extinction redirected the course of evolution. From that demanding world emerged the biological framework supporting the Eocene, the later ages of mammals, and ultimately, the living planet whose history can now be reconstructed from the enduring traces those forgotten pioneers left behind. The Paleocene vanished from Earth's surface approximately 56 million years ago, yet it never truly disappeared. Its landscapes faded, its dominant animals vanished, and its forests changed beyond recognition, but the evolutionary pressures of that remarkable age remained. They became embedded within anatomy itself, preserved in bones, muscles, behavior, and inherited instructions carried through countless generations of living mammals. Modern whales provide one of the clearest reminders. Hidden deep within their bodies are tiny vestigial hind limb bones, remnants of legs that no longer serve a meaningful purpose in swimming. These bones persist because their distant ancestors once walked across land before gradually adapting to an increasingly aquatic existence. Although the complete transition into fully marine mammals occurred after the Paleocene, the terrestrial ancestors that first occupied rivers, floodplains, and forest margins during that epoch belong to the evolutionary foundation from which whales eventually emerged. Their forgotten anatomy still leaves a recognizable imprint beneath the powerful muscles of every living whale. The human hand also carries an inheritance shaped during those ancient forests. Long, flexible fingers, an opposable thumb, and the ability to grasp branches securely proved invaluable for small primates navigating densely wooded habitats. Remaining above the forest floor reduced encounters with many dangerous predators while opening access to fruit, flowers, insects, and shelter among the branches. Structures originally refined for climbing later supported delicate manipulation, tool making, artistic expression, and written language. A survival adaptation forged within Paleocene forests eventually became one of humanity's defining characteristics. Body size itself reveals another enduring legacy. During the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, several mammalian lineages demonstrated an ability to become smaller as global temperatures increased before expanding again when climates moderated. That flexibility reflects millions of years spent facing changing environmental conditions during the Paleocene. Natural selection repeatedly favored mammals, capable of adjusting to shifting climates instead of remaining rigidly committed to one particular body size. Descendants inheriting greater developmental flexibility carried an advantage into future environmental changes long after the epoch itself had ended. Diet offers another example of Paleocene influence. Many of today's most successful mammalian groups consume a broad assortment of foods, shifting among fruit, leaves, seeds, insects, fungi, or animal prey according to seasonal opportunity. Such versatility reflects survival strategies refined during an age when ecosystems frequently reorganized and dependable food sources could disappear within relatively short evolutionary intervals. Lineages capable of exploiting many resources consistently outlasted those dependent upon a narrow dietary specialization. The mammalian brain likewise bears evidence of this demanding history. Compared with most other vertebrate groups, mammals devote considerable energy to maintaining relatively large and metabolically expensive brains. Such an investment becomes worthwhile only when enhanced learning, memory, and behavioral flexibility improve survival. Throughout the Paleocene, Continually changing climates, habitats, competitors, and predators rewarded individuals capable of adjusting their behavior instead of relying solely upon instinct. Over millions of years, those advantages contributed to the continued refinement of mammalian cognition across numerous lineages. These characteristics appear so familiar today that they can seem inevitable, yet each represents the accumulated outcome of countless evolutionary decisions made under the pressures of a world recovering from catastrophe and continually reshaped by environmental change. The Paleocene therefore survives within every living mammal. It remains written in hidden bones, grasping hands, adaptable bodies, flexible diets, and capable minds. Although the epoch itself ended millions of years ago, its greatest achievements continue moving through the living world, carried forward in bodies that still preserve the solutions discovered during one of Earth's most demanding chapters. The Paleocene may seem impossibly distant, separated from the present by approximately 56 million years. Yet the ecological principles revealed during that age continue unfolding across the modern world. They operate on smaller landscapes and over shorter spans of time, but the underlying relationships remain strikingly familiar. Food webs still respond to disruption according to the same biological rules that governed the rebuilding of ecosystems after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. Whenever an apex predator disappears from a living ecosystem, changes ripple outward through every connected level of life. Herbivores alter their numbers and behavior. Vegetation responds to new grazing patterns. Smaller predators expand or decline, and entire habitats gradually reorganize. These cascading effects mirror, on a compressed scale, the widespread ecological restructuring that followed the disappearance of the dominant predators at the beginning of the Paleocene. Geological time changes the pace of recovery, yet the fundamental architecture of ecological networks remains remarkably consistent. One of the clearest modern demonstrations occurred within Yellowstone National Park after wolves were reintroduced during the mid 1990s. Their return influenced elk behavior almost immediately. Instead of feeding freely in open river valleys, many elk spent less time grazing in exposed areas where wolves hunted most effectively. Vegetation along streams recovered as browsing pressure eased, allowing shrubs and trees to become established once more. Stronger plant growth stabilized riverbanks, reducing erosion and gradually influencing the courses of streams. As habitats improved, numerous other species benefited, producing measurable increases in biodiversity throughout the ecosystem. What unfolded within Yellowstone over roughly 30 years resembles, in miniature, the ecological processes that unfolded after the Paleocene began. The difference lies in scale. Yellowstone represents one protected landscape, while the disappearance of dominant predators after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction affected virtually every continent at once. The Paleocene also unfolded across approximately 10 million years instead of a few decades, allowing ecological adjustments to proceed through countless generations of evolutionary change. Comparable patterns appear beneath the oceans as well. Declining populations of large sharks have altered food webs in many coastal environments during the past century. In several regions, reductions in shark numbers allowed ray populations to expand substantially. Increased predation by rays depleted shellfish communities that had previously remained more abundant, changing the structure of coastal ecosystems and affecting numerous additional species. Although marine environments differ greatly from terrestrial forests, the ecological consequences still reflect the same principle. The loss of top predators reverberates throughout the entire community. The Paleocene therefore provides an unusually valuable perspective on recovery itself. Modern conservation often measures success across years or decades because those intervals match human experience. The fossil record extends that perspective across millions of years, revealing that complete ecological reorganization after widespread apex predator loss proceeds far more gradually than human observation alone might suggest. Stable regulatory structures require immense spans of evolutionary and ecological adjustment before becoming firmly established once again. For that reason, the Paleocene remains more than an ancient interval preserved within rocks. It serves as a detailed natural record of how ecosystems respond when their highest regulators disappear and countless surviving species begin competing to occupy newly available roles. Those same relationships continue operating today across forests, grasslands, rivers, coastlines, and oceans, reminding us that the biological patterns established long ago remain active wherever the balance of a living ecosystem is fundamentally altered. Few intervals in Earth's history invite reflection beyond geology as naturally as the Paleocene. It presents more than a record of vanished animals or changing climates. It preserves the rare example of a living world attempting to function after losing the organizing structure that had governed terrestrial ecosystems for millions of years. The question reaching across that immense span concerns more than fossils. It concerns what becomes of life when no enduring authority remains to shape the balance between countless competing forms. Throughout most of Earth's history, ecological communities have been organized around recognizable hierarchies. Predators influence herbivores, dominant species limit competitors, and established relationships help stabilize the movement of energy through food webs. During the Paleocene, however, no single lineage consistently occupied the highest terrestrial position across the world's major continents. Regional predators certainly existed, yet none achieved the widespread, lasting influence once exercised by the great dinosaurian hunters before the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. The consequences appeared throughout recovering ecosystems. Mammalian groups diversified rapidly into newly available ecological opportunities, only for many of those lineages to disappear after comparatively brief intervals. Communities continually reorganized as changing climates, evolving competitors, and shifting habitats altered the conditions upon which success depended. Evolution repeatedly generated promising combinations of anatomy and behavior, but many proved temporary before another wave of environmental or biological change reshaped the landscape once again. Viewed across millions of years, this continual restructuring carried an unexpected benefit. The absence of long-lasting ecological dominance allowed numerous evolutionary possibilities to exist simultaneously. Different feeding strategies, body plans, movement styles, and reproductive patterns emerged across continents without one overwhelmingly successful lineage, excluding every alternative. The Paleocene became a remarkable period of biological experimentation, producing an extraordinary range of forms whose diversity exceeded the survival of any individual dynasty. Stable ecosystems often preserve successful arrangements for immense spans of time. Once established, dominant species tend to occupy key ecological positions so effectively that competing alternatives remain limited. The late Cretaceous demonstrated this pattern through its enduring dinosaurian communities, where remarkable diversity flourished within a relatively stable ecological framework. When that long established structure disappeared, relatively few surviving organisms possessed the adaptations necessary to assume those same dominant roles immediately. Recovery, therefore, demanded the gradual construction of entirely new ecological relationships. From that perspective, the Paleocene reveals a profound balance between stability and innovation. Stability offers predictability, efficient ecological organization, and enduring relationships among species. Instability introduces uncertainty, yet it also creates opportunities unavailable within mature ecosystems. New lineages explore ecological roles that previously remained inaccessible, while countless evolutionary pathways unfold in parallel before natural selection gradually narrows the possibilities once more. This balance continues shaping ecological research today. Scientists studying habitat disruption, species loss, and ecosystem recovery seek to understand how communities reorganize after major disturbances. The Paleocene provides the longest natural record of that process, illustrating both the immediate costs of widespread ecological instability and the remarkable adaptive potential that can emerge across sufficiently long spans of evolutionary time. Seen through this wider lens, the Paleocene's apparent disorder becomes part of a deeper creative process. The disappearance of established ecological order demanded an immense biological investment measured across approximately 10 million years. Countless lineages participated, many leaving no direct descendants at all. Yet from that prolonged interval of uncertainty emerged a living world richer in adaptive possibilities, providing the evolutionary foundation upon which the succeeding ages of mammals would steadily build. Outside the fossil record, forests still grow, predators still hunt, rivers still reshape their valleys, and every living community continues exchanging energy through the same invisible relationships that governed life tens of millions of years ago. Approximately 66 million years separate the opening of the Paleocene from the present day, yet the fundamental architecture of ecology has remained astonishingly consistent. Species have changed, continents have shifted, and climates have risen and fallen, while the rules connecting living organisms have endured. Whenever an apex predator disappears, those relationships begin adjusting almost immediately. Herbivores alter where they feed, smaller predators expand into newly available niches, vegetation changes in response to different grazing patterns, and entire food webs gradually reorganize. These cascading effects are not unique to any single period of Earth's history. They govern recovering Paleocene ecosystems after the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, and they continue shaping modern landscapes wherever ecological regulation weakens. Geological time changes the duration of these transformations, yet the underlying processes remain remarkably familiar. The diversity produced during the Paleocene also survives as an enduring lesson. Across approximately 10 million years, countless mammalian, avian, reptilian, and plant lineages explored ecological opportunities that had never previously existed. Many disappeared before leaving descendants, while others contributed pieces of evolutionary history that later generations inherited. Modern conservation seeks to preserve the diversity that remains today because every surviving lineage carries possibilities accumulated across an immeasurable span of biological experimentation. The fossil record demonstrates how quickly extraordinary variety can be reduced when ecosystems experience widespread disruption. Recovery, however, followed no predetermined path. The Paleocene reveals that rebuilding after global ecological collapse required immense stretches of evolutionary time, continual competition, and repeated environmental change. Even the transition toward more stable ecosystems unfolded alongside another major climatic disturbance during the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum. The living world that eventually emerged differed profoundly from the one that had vanished before it. Evolution constructed new ecological relationships instead of restoring those that had already disappeared. That perspective changes how the Paleocene can be understood. Rather than preserving a simple story of destruction followed by recovery, it records the gradual construction of an unfamiliar biological future. Every generation inherited conditions shaped by those preceding it, responding to opportunities and limitations without any awareness of the larger transformation unfolding across millions of years. Individual animals pursued food, avoided predators, reproduced, and disappeared, while evolution assembled the foundations of ecosystems that none of them would ever witness. Human beings now occupy a singular position within that continuing story. Unlike every lineage that participated in the Paleocene, our species possesses the ability to examine fossil evidence, compare ancient ecosystems with living ones, and recognize patterns extending across geological time. Rocks, bones, and inherited anatomy together preserve a narrative reaching far beyond individual generations, allowing the present to observe the consequences of events that unfolded long before humanity existed. From that perspective, the Paleocene offers more than knowledge about an ancient epoch. It presents a record of resilience, uncertainty, adaptation, and transformation written across approximately 10 million years of evolutionary history. The world inherited today emerged through innumerable lives that never understood the significance of their own struggles. Their collective history now rests within stone, awaiting the one species capable of reading it and recognizing how profoundly the living earth was shaped by that long passage through uncertainty. Looking back across the Paleocene, it is tempting to imagine an abandoned throne waiting for a worthy successor. The fossil record seems to support that impression. One contender emerged, flourished for a time, and disappeared. Another followed along a different branch of evolution, only to meet the same fate. Across approximately 10 million years, the history of the epoch appears filled with rulers who never truly became kings of the world they inhabited. The names themselves have become echoes preserved within stone. Mesonychids vanished after occupying important predatory roles. Condylarths disappeared after helping shape the future of hoofed mammals. Gastornis no longer walks beneath forest canopies. Titanoboa no longer coils through tropical wetlands. South America's great terror birds eventually yielded their dominance as ecological conditions changed. Every lineage that seemed poised to define the age ultimately surrendered its place to another, leaving no permanent dynasty behind. Viewed from another perspective, however, the throne itself never stood empty. Ecological dominance is not defined by a particular species occupying a permanent seat of authority. It emerges through the continual interaction between organisms and the living communities surrounding them. Predators influence prey. Herbivores reshape vegetation. Competitors redirect evolutionary pathways, and every success alters opportunities for something else. Throughout the Paleocene, those relationships never disappeared. They shifted constantly as different lineages competed, expanded, declined, and gave way to successors. Competition itself became the organizing force. Without one enduring lineage controlling terrestrial ecosystems across continents, ecological balance emerged through countless local contests unfolding simultaneously. Every expanding population created pressures that influenced another. Every extinction opened opportunities for replacement. Every successful adaptation changed the selective landscape, confronting neighboring species. The resulting instability imposed enormous evolutionary costs, yet it also maintained ecological movement, preventing the living world from remaining fixed around any single biological solution. Across those millions of years, many familiar branches of the modern world gradually emerged from that continuing process. Early relatives of horses continued refining adaptations that later transformed open landscapes. Ancestors of whales began evolutionary journeys that would eventually lead from land into the oceans. Elephant lineages developed characteristics that later supported some of Earth's largest terrestrial mammals. Carnivorous mammals steadily accumulated traits that would ultimately produce wolves and many other successful predators. Hidden among forest branches, small primates preserved another evolutionary path whose significance remained invisible for millions of years. From those modest primates eventually emerged the only species known to reconstruct this history. Human beings inherited bodies carrying traces of Paleocene adaptations while also developing the capacity to uncover fossils, compare genomes, and assemble evidence scattered across continents. That ability allows the present to recognize patterns extending through geological time, revealing how countless extinct organisms contributed to a world they would never experience. In many respects, humanity now occupies another period of ecological transition. Living communities continue changing as environments shift and species respond to new pressures. The ultimate outcome remains beyond present observation, just as it remained unknowable to every animal living during the Paleocene. Evolution continues unfolding, one generation at a time, without revealing its destination to those participating within it. When the Paleocene finally yielded to the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, another profound transformation reshaped life across the planet. The world that emerged afterward differed from the one entering that climatic upheaval, yet it carried forward the accumulated legacy of every preceding struggle. That inheritance remained preserved within living anatomy, evolutionary history, and ecological relationships, ensuring that the long contest of the Paleocene continued echoing through every age that followed. No boundary in Earth's history truly marks an ending. Each epoch leaves behind landscapes reshaped, lineages transformed, and possibilities carried forward into worlds that no longer resemble their origins. The Paleocene passed approximately 56 million years ago, yet its influence continued flowing into every chapter that followed, becoming inseparable from the history of the planet itself. The Eocene inherited a world still carrying the consequences of that prolonged interval of ecological uncertainty. Predatory mammals became increasingly specialized as creodonts reached the height of their success, and the earliest true carnivores continued expanding into important ecological roles. Whales completed one of evolution's most extraordinary transitions, leaving land completely and entering the open oceans, where later descendants would eventually become the largest animals known to have lived. Ecological relationships that had remained unsettled for millions of years gradually approached greater stability as competing lineages consolidated their positions. Another transformation arrived with the Oligocene, when global climates cooled and many of the dense tropical forests that had characterized earlier ages retreated toward equatorial regions. Expanding grasslands introduced unfamiliar evolutionary pressures across broad landscapes. Grazing mammals diversified in response to new vegetation. Elephant ancestors followed changing environments across continents, and feline predators gradually evolved adaptations suited to more open habitats. Among primates, increasingly varied environments encouraged social complexity that would continue developing across many succeeding lineages. Seen across geological time, every later epoch carried traces of foundations established during the Paleocene. Predator communities, herbivore diversity, forest ecosystems, grassland, food webs, and marine mammals all remained connected through long chains of ancestry, extinction, adaptation, and replacement. No later biological community appeared in isolation. Each inherited opportunities created by organisms that had solved immediate problems without any awareness of the distant consequences of their survival. The modern biosphere, therefore, differs greatly from anything the Paleocene itself might seem to have been constructing. Many dominant lineages of that epoch disappeared entirely, leaving no direct continuation of their former prominence. Yet, their evolutionary experiments altered ecological conditions for those that followed. Every unsuccessful branch redirected competition, every extinction opened opportunities, and every temporary success influenced the selective pressures experienced by future organisms. The living world gradually assembled itself from innumerable pathways that ended long before the present. The participants never recognized the significance of their contributions. Mesonychids could not anticipate that later carnivorous mammals would inherit ecological spaces they helped define. Condylarths possessed no awareness that later hoofed mammals would flourish within environments shaped partly by their own existence. Small arboreal primates sought food, shelter, and safety among branches without any knowledge that countless generations later, one branch of their descendants would study fossils, map genomes, and reconstruct vanished ecosystems through science. Every lineage responded only to the demands immediately surrounding it. Survival from one generation to the next remained the only measure available to creatures living through continual environmental change. Evolution required nothing more. Across approximately 10 million years, innumerable ordinary lives accumulated into extraordinary biological transformation, each contributing a fragment to a future no participant could imagine. The Paleocene eventually became another layer within Earth's deep archive, preserved beneath younger rocks and younger worlds. Its forests disappeared, its dominant animals vanished, and its ecological contests faded into geological memory. Yet everything living today still carries some portion of that inheritance, reminding us that enduring change often emerges from countless acts of persistence, repeated across spans of time far beyond the experience of any single life. Every geological age leaves a different inheritance. Some preserve the rise of extraordinary rulers, others are remembered for catastrophic endings. The Paleocene occupies a rarer place within Earth's history. It began amid the collapse of a world that had endured for approximately 130 million years, and it concluded after laying the biological foundations of the one that still surrounds us today. Between those distant moments stretched approximately 10 million years of continual adaptation, replacement, uncertainty, and renewal. Unlike the great ages before it, the Paleocene never settled beneath the lasting authority of a single dominant terrestrial lineage. Mammals, birds, reptiles, and countless other organisms explored ecological opportunities left vacant after the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, yet no body plan remained sufficiently successful to suppress every alternative. Evolution, therefore, continued testing new possibilities across forests, wetlands, rivers, coastlines, and recovering landscapes. Diversity accumulated because competition remained open, allowing numerous solutions to exist together before natural selection gradually refined those that endured into later epochs. This prolonged interval demonstrates that the outcome of ecological transition depends upon the manner in which it unfolds. Stability eventually returned, yet it emerged through millions of years of experimentation instead of immediate replacement. Countless lineages appeared briefly before disappearing. Others contributed only fragments of anatomy, behavior, or ecological influence that later descendants inherited and transformed. The resulting living world contained far greater evolutionary richness than any single rapid succession of dominant species could likely have produced. Across approximately 66 million years, one modest branch of that expanding mammalian diversity followed its own unlikely path. Small primates adapted to life among branches, refining grasping hands, forward facing vision, flexible behavior, and increasingly capable brains. Generation after generation, those characteristics accumulated without purpose, beyond immediate survival. Eventually, one descendant acquired the remarkable ability to examine fossils, reconstruct vanished ecosystems, compare inherited genomes, and understand the immense history from which it emerged. That achievement carries an unusual perspective. Humanity can recognize that ecological order develops gradually, depends upon countless relationships among living organisms, and becomes extraordinarily difficult to rebuild once broadly disrupted. The Paleocene records those truths across an immense span of geological time. It reveals that recovering ecosystems demand persistence, extending far beyond the experience of individual species, while every surviving lineage contributes to futures it cannot possibly anticipate. The epic, therefore, leaves behind more than fossilized teeth, footprints, pollen grains, and layers of sedimentary rock. It preserves evidence that ecological communities derive their resilience from networks of interacting organisms rather than from permanent dominance by any single lineage. Predators, prey, scavengers, plants, decomposers, and innumerable smaller participants together create the balance, sustaining the living world. Their continual interactions become the enduring framework upon which biological stability ultimately rests. The throne that seemed vacant throughout the Paleocene was never destined to belong forever to one victorious species. Over time, it became occupied by something larger than any individual ruler, an interconnected web of evolving life whose strength emerged from continual adjustment instead of permanent control. That living network continues surrounding every organism on Earth today. The brutal age eventually ended, yet its legacy remains woven through every ecosystem, every lineage, and every inherited adaptation that followed. Across millions of years, struggle gave rise to possibility. Uncertainty became the pathway toward renewal, and an unsettled world gradually assembled the extraordinary diversity that still defines the planet we now call home.